Hello and welcome to the second of tonight's 2014 Georgia General Assembly Forums hosted by the Coweta County Republican Party, the Coweta County Democratic Party, and the Newnan-Coweta Chamber of Commerce. Thanks again to all three of these organizations coming together and hosting tonight's forums, and to the Central Educational Center, Michael Britt and his student team members here in CEC's video production studio for hosting us and for putting on these wonderful sets for our candidates tonight. We also would like to thank Georgia Public Broadcasting once again for the use of some of the sets in tonight's forums. Our next forum is going to feature two candidates running for Georgia Senate District 28. And we welcome both candidates here to the Central Educational Center tonight. Senate incumbent Mike Crane and challenger Cynthia Bennett. Senator Crane, Republican, Cynthia Bennett, Democratic challenger. Thank y'all both for being here tonight. We would remind our guests tonight to, again, please allow us to maintain the neutrality and the formality of tonight's forum by holding your applause and by refraining from any demonstration for or against the candidates here tonight or the positions they're discussing during the forum. Again, all three of our organizations have come together to put this forum on for voters all across Coweta County. We want to and we're looking forward to hearing from our candidates tonight. As with our first forum, our Georgia House Georgia House of Representative candidates Gene King and Bob Trammell, each of our candidates up here now are going to be allowed a 3-minute opening and closing statement. We'll start in just a few moments for that, but to cover our rules, our candidates after that opening statement is going to be asked a series of questions and will have up to 1 minute to respond to each. After each question, of course, when the second person answers that question, the first person who answered will be offered a rebuttal of up to 30 seconds if they so choose. If they do, then of course a response from their opposing candidate will be allowed as well. I would caution our candidates one more time about time. We have 1 minute answers on this. If you find yourself running short of time or running out of time, I would encourage you to finish your thought, finish the sentence you're on, and if we can avoid it, we'll try not to call time on you from over here. So we are going to get started with our opening statements. So that each one of you can tell us a little bit about yourself, why you're running for the Georgia General Assembly. We took a coin flip a few moments ago. Senator Crane is going to be the first of our candidates to make an opening statement, followed by Ms. Bennett. And then we'll stagger our questions so neither one of you will be the last or first to answer each time. Ms. Bennett then will be the first candidate to answer the first question of the evening, and so on. And so with that, Senator Crane, again, thank you for being here tonight, and we offer you the opening statement.
Well, very good. You're going to have to bear with me tonight as I find my voice. I seem to have lost it or misplaced it earlier today, and I haven't quite found it yet. So every time I start to speak, it comes out a little bit froggy. So just kind of pretend I'm doing my best impression of Froggy from Little Rascals over the next 30 minutes. And maybe you can tolerate the sound of my voice because it's kind of difficult. But thank you very much for being here tonight. Thank you for taking your time to be involved in a very, very important election. Dean, I want to thank you for your moderation and excellent job you do. It's very well done. So why would I be here asking for your vote tonight? As your state senator, we've got a very, very important election coming in front of us. There's some important things that have to be decided. But I'd ask you to look back just a little bit and to get a sense of trajectory for Georgia. The nation's in deep trouble on many levels, but in Georgia, 4 years ago, Governor Deal took office, and it was the bottom of one of the deepest recessions Georgia has ever seen. And since that time, everything has been on a positive trajectory. And what I would encourage you to notice is to watch those numbers. We are recovering ever so slowly, but we're recovering financially, we're recovering economically. In our households, we're kind of lagging a little bit, but we are headed in the right direction, my friends. And I would encourage you to help us keep heading in the right direction by supporting conservative positions that have gotten us to this point so far. We are looking at this year alone an extra $500 million that the governor has allocated and the legislature has allocated to education. It was the lion's share of the increased funding the state saw in revenues this year. So when we talk about education tonight, and it'll be talked about a lot, keep in mind the trajectory we're on, and you don't want to interrupt a positive trajectory. If we were going in the wrong direction, I could see we need to turn things around. But for Georgia, we are ranked in the top 10 with the best economic outlook of all the states in the nation. There are 3 organizations that rate Georgia as not the 5th or the 10th, but the number one place in the country to do business. And that is because of conservative policies. That is because of conservative, fiscal, responsible behavior at the legislative and executive levels. We are heading in the right direction. Your support of my campaign will continue that conservative direction, and I look forward to this evening's discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Again, Cynthia Bennett, Democratic Challenger, thank you for being here tonight. Your opening statement, please.
Mr. Thompson, Mr. Jackson, Mr. Frost, thank you so much for all of your work. And to the members of the Newnan-Coweta Chamber of Commerce, thank you for supporting this public discussion of issues. To the audiences plural, thank you for taking time to be here and sharing in this discussion. To the public officials and candidates present here this evening, thank you for your energy and your commitment to service for our community. My name is Cynthia Bennett. I am a candidate for Georgia State Senate, District 28. I live here. I am your neighbor. I am an educator. I am a small business owner. I entered this race because I believe that this district deserves representation focused on this region and working for our future. I am running because you deserve leaders actively seeking to identify and solve problems being faced by Georgia and this district. Georgia's children deserve a quality education that allows them to compete on a world stage. They deserve a chance to benefit from the Hope Scholarship Program. We can have quality education that supports a growing economy. Georgia can build an educated, skilled workforce that will attract new businesses and jobs to fuel our economy. Georgia can have a transportation system that will support business growth and a thriving economy. Our business community deserves a viable, healthy environment in which to grow and prosper. Georgians deserve to feel secure in their food, housing, and medical care, regardless of age and circumstance. We deserve a modern, accessible, and well-funded medical system. We can, all of us, participate fully in the taxes that we pay and the benefits that they bring to the citizens of Georgia. Georgia faces problems. These problems cannot be solved by bandaging broken systems or hiding behind party rhetoric. We must work together to identify and solve the problems facing our state. I'm a problem solver. I will not be distracted. Cynthia Bennett, candidate, Georgia State Senate, District 28.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you both for your opening statements. We'll hopefully have several opportunities throughout the evening to talk about some of the positions you opened in your opening statements. We'll go to our next question. I think, Ms. Bennett, you are going to answer first on this. It's sort of a follow-up to your opening statement. We are going to talk a great deal about politics, as is appropriate tonight. We'd like to ask you, as people running for office, to tell us a little bit about you or yourself personally. And you referenced, both of you, some of that in your opening statements, talking about your life and your work experience. The question that we've been given is one that deals with your philosophical positions, your faith, but those big questions about who you are. The question is, as humans, we carry around us with us certain presuppositions about the world, our shared experience in it, those foundational beliefs, and they shape the way each one of us approach life and work and those we encounter within it. You are seeking to represent a diverse electorate within which we have an awful lot of people of varying sets of beliefs. how do you see your own personal beliefs, those your faith or your other philosophical beliefs, influencing the way in which you think, speak, and act in your role as a representative of others? Ms. Bennett, we'll go to you first on that.
In my lifetime, I've traveled a great deal throughout the United States and throughout Europe and in Asia. And I have come to respect and celebrate diversity. Diversity in race, diversity in religion, diversity in philosophy. And I believe, I know that that makes me open to communication and welcoming of differences. That has also taught me to work together with people different from me, accept what they bring to the table to solve the problems. I'm a public school educator. I have been an educator for 25 years in Coweta County. This has given me an opportunity to, again, work with different groups of people at different economic levels that have different desires and cultural beliefs. I'm open, I'm honest, I'm a strong communicator.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Crane.
Well, that's a wonderful question, and it has a great deal of validity, because what it asks of a candidate is, what do you believe? Because at the end of the day, those things that you believe end up in a red or a green button as you vote. You are selecting yes or no on legislation, hundreds of pieces of which come before you. So what is your paradigm? What is your foundation? From where do you stand when you make those decisions? For me, I'm very plain and clear about it. As a Christian, my faith is in Christ. He is my Redeemer. He is my King. He is the source of all my strength. I'll never apologize for it. I will never separate it from my public discourse, because in Him and through Him I have my being. It tells you much about me, because our Constitution, which is the one thing I, as your elected official, am sworn to uphold, your Constitution, the thing I'm sworn to uphold, says that I will secure the blessings of liberty for future generations, not meet everybody's needs every day, but use my principles to make sure everyone's treated equally under the law.
Thank you, sir. Rebuttal, Mrs. Bennett.
Well, it's difficult to rebut a positive statement like that, but I do want to say that I agree with Senator Kane that I believe our deep and religious philosophies influence all that we do. I was very fortunate to grow up in a household with a Catholic father and a Methodist mother. We grew up in a church. Christian beliefs were the foundation of the decisions that were made in our family. When I married a Catholic, and we choose to celebrate and worship in the Catholic Church, but our deep Christian foundations dictate all the decisions that we make for family and professionally.
Very good. Response?
No, that's good. Glad to hear it.
Very good. We'll go on to our next question. We'll have a series of questions talking a little bit about the economics of the state. And let me start off with Senator Crane on this one. Georgia, like many states, continues to be affected by the slow recovery since the recession. State unemployment has exceeded the national unemployment rate through a great deal of this recession and recovery. And I understand that we've recently read that since April 2014, unemployment rate in Georgia went up while the federal rate declined. What should our state government do to best promote economic prosperity for businesses and a strong economy throughout our state? Senator Crane.
Well, that's an excellent question. I think a lot of what I spoke of in my opening statement addresses that. What should Georgia do to continue economic growth? Because our prosperity depends on economic growth. Stagnation benefits no one. And what attracts businesses, which is the driver of economic growth, what attracts them to Georgia? Its location, it's our diverse mix of our population, it's our strong educational system, it's our natural resources, it's the wonderful port in Savannah that is just now going to get started in its deepening project and is going to help transform Georgia for the future. The whole goal for economic prosperity is you want to attract businesses to a stable environment, low taxes, open workforce. That's going to make the difference.
Thank you, sir. Mrs. Bennett, same question. What should our state government do to promote economic prosperity for business and a strong economy for our citizens?
Since 2010, we have welcomed in the state of Georgia many major projects. They've been announced and many of them have come to fruition. Most recently and very exciting here in Coweta County is the Bridgeport Manufacturing Industrial Park. The sustained low employment levels is a great concern. And one of the ways that we can conquer that is by addressing the fact that increased productivity has yielded fewer jobs because our workers are much more productive. So what can our legislature do? We can support programs like the College and Career Readiness Program that is already in place in our education system, continue to fund those programs fully so that we can develop a better educated and productive workforce that is skilled in using new technologies. Additionally, we have to, as a state, learn to develop and adopt quickly productivity enhancing technology.
Thank you, ma'am. Senator Crane, rebuttal?
Well, Dean, you mentioned some the economic data with regards to unemployment in Georgia. Some of the things we don't see in unemployment numbers is the workforce participation rate. And what the numbers tell me in Georgia is more Georgians are ready to get back to work. More Georgians are entering the marketplace than is happening on a nationwide level. That's why our numbers look a little skewed against the national numbers. Georgia is growing. Businesses are coming here. We are doing the right things and setting the groundwork for Georgians to get back to work and to attain the quality of jobs they're looking for.
Thank you, sir. Response, Ms. Bennett?
Number 50 in the nation is not a little skewed. Number 30 in the nation, number 25 in the nation, we can say, oh, the numbers were skewed, we're actually better than that. Number 50 is shameful. And we need to focus our resources, we need to focus our leadership, we need to be proactive in bringing jobs to Georgia and educating our workforce so that Georgians can go back to work. We need to look at other industry, solar energy, biotech, expanding transportation.
Thank you, ma'am. We appreciate it. We'll move on with our next question, something of a follow-up to that, talking about the role of state government in economic development. In your opinion, is Georgia a competitive state in terms of attracting new investing and growing businesses here in the state? What, if anything, do you support in terms of changing or improving our economic development strategy in the state of Georgia? Ms. Bennett, you first.
Yes, Georgia is very attractive. Our quality of life is amazing. Our natural resources are abundant. And right now, we have a very successful education system, especially here in Coweta County. We are ahead of the nation and the rest of the state in SAT scores. We are doing very, very well. However, this is going to fade away. Businesses are not going to come to hire people who are not healthy and are not educated. If we do not reverse the austerity cuts and the budget cuts, if we do not take a good stewardship position of the tax dollars that Georgians pay to keep our human capital strong and healthy, businesses will not come to Georgia no matter how many tax cuts you give them. They are looking for employees that will help them as businesses grow.
Thank you, ma'am. Senator Crane.
Well, sometimes they say the proof is in the pudding. And right here in Coweta County, we see economic growth that is extraordinary in the state. Coweta County is uniquely positioned as the heart of the 28th Senate District. With the interstate bisecting the county, we have attracted some excellent, excellent businesses thanks to the hard work of our economic development group. You see it all around us. We've got Niagara here. We've got Cancer Treatment Center of America just finishing up a huge expansion. And they'll be bumping up against a state law that needs to be taken care of so that they can continue to grow and meet the needs of not only the rest of our country, but of Georgians as well in a bigger and better way. The proof is in the pudding, folks. Businesses are coming to Georgia left and right. This is the best place in the nation to do business. And we welcome all businesses here. How do we promote that? Stable tax structure, low tax rates, strong workforce, strong emphasis on education. Come to Georgia. Let's get to work.
All right. Rebuttal, Mrs. Bennett?
Right now, there's a plan in place to cap and even lower the Georgia state income tax. I am not confident that reducing the current level of revenue is going to help Georgia grow and strengthen and continue to be a good place to do business. I worry about that, and I caution legislators in voting to cap and even lower the state income tax.
Response, Senator Crane.
Well, that's going to be on the ballot for voters to look at. It's a constitutional amendment to cap the state income tax rate at 6%. That makes us competitive and predictable for the rest of the nation. People want low tax structures. Who in this room wants to pay more taxes? I mean, the camera can't see it, but nobody's going to raise it. Well, there's one hand raised in the back. Maybe you're not paying your level yet, but that was two. Yes, just to be honest with it. But there's 60 people in this room that didn't raise their hands. We don't need more taxes. We need better administration of the resources that you give us to steward. And we have done an excellent job the last 4 years. Watch us continue to do an excellent job the next 4 years.
Thank you very much. In fact, we have a question that was submitted that I was going to go on to next, and in a sense, y'all both already opened up in your rebuttals and responses, and that is the tax cap amendment. And if so, I'd just like to really, in a sense, ask you to continue that line of thought. We'll start with you, Senator Crane, and, on this. Do you support the tax cap amendment? Are there, or what, I should say, what sort of tax changes of whatever type would you most like to see put in place as a Georgia senator?
Excellent. Well, that's a good question, Dean. I do support the cap on the income tax. But more importantly, we have to realize that every tax paid, every single one, whether it's called a corporate tax, whether it's called a fee, whether it's called whatever they call it, we pay it individually. Those costs come back to us and we pay them. Our job is, as government, is to take the least amount of that money from you to accomplish the task we should do constitutionally as a government to provide for a free society. I think we're heading in the right direction with that, Dean, and I think we are working right now, the Senate leadership and us are working together for some tax revisions in this upcoming session that I think will be very beneficial for all Georgians.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Bennett.
For the last 4 or 5 or 6 or 10 years, I have heard about budget cuts and I have heard about tax cuts. They have not appeared in my life. They have not appeared in my personal life. And instead, what I've seen are austerity cuts to compensate, and agreed. We had a recession in 2007. We have had a slow recovery. But as the revenue has improved in the state of Georgia, I am not personally feeling it. If anything, more and more, as a member of the middle class, I'm feeling burdened and I'm feeling ignored. So I question the logic of reducing current revenue when we are already having to suffer austerity cuts that should be covered by the current revenue by reducing those.
Thank you, ma'am. Rebuttal, Senator Crane.
Well, don't ever confuse revenue with tax cuts. With most tax cuts, you will see an increase in economic activity without question. And in that increase in economic activity, even at the lower tax rates, more money flows to the state. All you got to do is ask New York, California, any of these states that's losing people to Georgia. In the last decade, 500,000 people have decided to choose Georgia for their home. And they came here for a reason, and it's because we've got a low, stable tax rate, and we've got conservative leadership. And I think we need to continue that line of thinking.
Okay, thank you very much. We have another, in a sense, particular tax question, in this case about a tax credit. We're going to start with Ms. Bennett on this one. Coweta County benefits from film and TV being produced within our county. We've heard conversations being held about whether to extend the tax credit to post-production activities as well. Would you support expanding the film and TV tax credit, Ms. Bennett?
Yes, and I'll tell you why. All of us have seen the growth. All of us have seen the growth in Georgia, but one of the reasons that I would support a tax credit being extended and to post-production for film and television is because film and television pays their employees a living wage. What I struggle with are corporations that get tax credits that do not pay their employees a living wage, and the taxpayers end up carrying the burden and subsidizing that differential. So my answer to your direct question is yes, I do, because the film and television industry pays the workers a living wage.
Senator Crane.
Tax credits are a very interesting item. To give a tax credit to you, I have to take something from somebody else. I don't think that's a good idea. I think it's manipulative in using the tax code not as a revenue source for the state, but as a behavior modification tool to coerce this behavior or that. Let's do solar power. Let's drive green car, battery-powered cars. Let's do this or this. What we need in Georgia is a fair tax platform where everybody contributes to the system at some level because we all benefit from it. Companies will come to Georgia if they see that kind of environment. It's guaranteed.
Thank you. Response, rebuttal?
I believe, I may have misunderstood, but I believe that my opponent just in the previous question used tax reductions as a force that attracts businesses to move to Georgia. And certainly tax reductions are part and parcel of tax credits. So I'm very confused about my opponent's position. Perhaps he'll explain it a little more clearly.
Allow me to clarify.
Please go right
Did it confuse anybody else in the room? Look what happens with the tax credit. When I talk about lowering tax rates, I'm talking about as on an even platform where everyone is treated equally under the law. Do you want the government picking favorites? Do you want the government picking winners and losers in business or in personal life? I don't. It's not the role of government. The government is to protect you from me from you, and us from our external enemies. That's the role of government, and to create an environment where we all can thrive. So we are looking at introducing an elimination, a sunset of all tax credits in Georgia to be offset by an accompanying reduction in the Georgia budget. Those things come hand in hand, and they'll be very beneficial, and they'll be fair to all Georgians.
Thank you very much. I believe that was the end of our rebuttal and response. We will move on to our next questions. Still talking a bit about the economy and the state budget. Both of you tonight have impressed me with your command of figures at our state government, so y'all please correct me if I'm wrong about this. Georgia's state government revenues fell from about $22 billion in 2008, I believe, at the beginning of the recession as it affected our state revenues, just over $18 billion 2 years ago, I believe, but back up to around $20 billion this year. We've seen restoration of some of those austerity cuts. We've seen state revenues increase a good bit this year, but there's still we still have some continuing budget cuts in austerity measures, et cetera, in respect to all state spending and programs. So, given that, what's your greatest priority in regards to the Georgia state budget? And we're going to allow up to 2 minutes to this question, and we'll start with Senator Crane.
Very good. The Georgia budget is probably the primary function of the legislative body, is to approve those numbers on an annual basis and to update them every 6 months at the midpoint. So we make projections about what next year will look like, and then we have to adjust based on the reality of what's taken place as the revenue stream has come into the state through the different tax mechanisms. Georgia's heading in the right direction. All our metrics seem to indicate that we will see increased tax revenues again next year. And just like we did this year, I expect to see next year that we will continue to emphasize investing in education. When you look at our budget, 54% of our budget is invested in education. That is the majority of our budget. 25 to 30%, depending on the numbers and what you're looking at, goes to health care in Georgia. All of the things we enjoy and interact with Georgia government, well, maybe we don't enjoy it, but all the things we interact with Georgia government, whether it's driver services or the state parks, anything else that Georgia does is done with 8% of that money. That is the wiggle room that Georgia has. We're committed to investing in education, and we will continue to do so. Our bonding portfolio has 62% of our bond portfolio is weighted in education. That is education infrastructure we've invested in. No one can come up here and say with legitimacy that we don't invest in education and don't take it seriously. We do put it as a #1 priority because we recognize the valuable impact it has long term. I think the budget's we're gonna see increased revenue next year, and we're gonna see some great prioritization that'll always emphasize education.
Thank you, sir. Again, up to 2 minutes to discuss the state budget. Ms. Bennett.
Public education and the health and welfare of citizens is not in the U.S. Constitution because it is incumbent upon the states to care for those areas. And Article 8 of the state constitution goes on for 7 pages outlining the responsibilities of the state to public education. I am delighted to hear Senator Crane say that he supports this continued funding of education. But here are some more statistics about education. Since 2002, state funding per student has declined 15.3%. Georgia is number 10 in the nation for total revenues for education, but when divided per capita, we spend less than $9,000 per student. The percentage in that same time frame of economically disadvantaged students has climbed from 45 to 60% of our K-12 population. And local revenue per student has fallen by 5.8%. I support a separate education budget, and I support going back in time and fulfilling the commitment made by the Georgia legislature in quality-based education funding and fully fund the QBE. It has never been fully funded and instead has been a target for austerity cuts. The K-12 formula has been underfunded by $1 billion in 2014.
Thank you very much. 30-second rebuttal, Senator Crane.
Oftentimes when we talk about the QBE and underfunding, the presumption is that the state is taking something from the school system. Well, they have to have it in the first place. The state collects the revenues, and then the state disperses those revenues according to best practices and fiscal responsibility. The QBE formula, because it's been underfunded since its inception, points to a more glaring defect, does it not? The formula has got to be wrong at some level. Now, I've asked my opponent, what is the right amount of funding for education? We don't know. In Georgia, it spreads from $5,000 per student to as high as $14,000 per student. What is the magic number? We don't have it, but the emphasis will always be on education in Georgia. It is in our Constitution, and it is primary to what we do.
Thank you, sir. Response, Mrs. Bennett.
Significant is the shift of the burden of funding education from the state to the local counties. And I think that's significant to remember. That percentage has shifted. The state has shirked its responsibility and instead is placing a burden on local funding. Again, the local revenue per student fell by 5.8%, not because the local education systems chose not to fund, because they weren't able to.
Thank you very much. I know we're talking a good deal about economics. We've gotten several questions from the audience. We're going to have a couple of other questions on the economics of the state of Georgia, if you could. So we're going to start, I think, with Ms. Bennett on this one. Here's a question from the audience, and it reads, my gross income is less than $120,000 per year, yet I pay a higher percentage in taxes than those persons making in excess of $500,000. Why are tax breaks afforded to wealthy citizens while the middle class are not afforded to middle class? Of course, this is verbatim from the audience. I will allow y'all to respond as you will to that question. And Ms. Bennett, you first.
That is an intriguing question, and unfortunately the answer is far too complicated for me to answer in 1 minute. But this is income inequality at its most descriptive. The middle class has taken on the burden of the tax structure too long. I believe that my opponent has already talked about the state of Georgia needs to take a good, strong look at its tax code. We need to take a look at truly progressive taxation, where those who earn the higher salaries have effectively the appropriate percentage. This individual is not alone. Effective taxation, where the percentage of tax that you pay is measured relative to your income, is significantly important and deserves a great deal of proactive leadership to move us in the right direction.
Thank you, ma'am. Senator Crane.
I can't speak specifically to that individual's questions because I haven't seen the two tax returns. Show me those. I could explain to you a little bit better. But know in Georgia that they look at your federal tax return. Your adjusted gross income on your federal return translates into what's going to be what you owe taxes on in Georgia. And Georgia has a progressive tax rate structure right now. It means it incrementally gets higher as you make more money. I think that is punitive to productivity. We've got to have a productive sector. A flat tax treats everyone equally. And if you get rid of all the deductions, if you get rid of all the manipulative code in the IRS code and in the Georgia state code, you get rid of those things, all the politics, most of it goes away because everybody just pays their part of the share without any deductions. The difference in those two examples that were probably given, Dean, were probably one person was able to take advantage of a lot of tax credits and tax deductions, where us in the middle income brackets were not availed as much of that. So.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Bennett, rebuttal?
Adjusted for inflation, the average Georgia family's per capita income, well, I'll just put it simply. Georgia families make $6,000 less this year than they did 10 years ago. And what we're seeing is Georgia families having to spend every penny that they earn, every dime that they make, middle-class families, for food, clothing, shelter, transportation. And this is where the problem lies. That the middle class does not have the income to provide for themselves and to plan for their future, to set a little bit aside. Over 50% of the families in Georgia, probably more, are $400 away from financial ruin. $400 away from financial ruin. They cannot afford for their income to be reduced anymore.
Thank you very much. Response, Senator Crane.
Well, I agree with that wholeheartedly. I mean, what is one of the reasons why we've seen a reduction in our buying power? Think about it. In the last 8 years, what was able to be purchased for $1 now it only has a value of 86 cents. We've lost 14% of our purchasing power because of the policies at the federal level. We have been printing money at the rate of $85 billion a year, and if you're going to serve in the state Senate, you better have a federal perspective because we get $11 billion a year from the federal government. We need a stable federal government so we can have a stable United States of America. We are in trouble, folks, because of the fiscal policies being thrust on us from upriver. And it's time we change that direction. Georgia has its house in order. It needs to continue to do so.
Thank you very much. We'll get on to our last question that deals sort of specifically with the question of economics and budgets. And this is a budget question from the audience.
All right.
And we're starting with Senator Crane. If you had the votes of colleagues in line, which state of Georgia agency would you eliminate and why?
Oh, that's very interesting.
If
I had the votes to eliminate an agency, wow. The way the Board of Regents is structured in Georgia, they get their entire budget in a lump sum from the state legislature. And there's no way for the people to see or have any impact or influence on how those dollars are spent. I would like to see that reworked so the citizens are reconnected with what's happening in our post-secondary school system. We have some of the best post-secondary schools in the country. Georgia Tech, University of Georgia. They are top schools in the entire nation, but they're getting too expensive for our kids to attend. We have been on a building binge for the last 15 years. We need to have some more oversight at the state level. I'd like to see, I'm not saying abolish it, but we need to be able to see behind the curtain at the Board of Regents.
Thank you, sir. Mrs. Bennett.
I don't think we can afford to cut any more. If I wanted to rework an agency, I would like to rework the Governor's Development Council, because over the past several years, that council has ignored the policy proposals made to it by regional planning commissions, by the Council on Aging, by the very professionals and researchers that our tax dollars pay for to do the kind of policy planning and research that we need to sustain growth, well, to return back to a growing Georgia. Our per capita GDP has declined beginning in 1998. This is not something that started with the recession. So I wouldn't close an agency, but I do agree with my opponent. There are several that need to be reworked so that they use our tax dollars in a fair and equitable manner.
Thank you, ma'am. Rebuttal, Senator Crane?
I don't know if it's a rebuttal. It's more so just to talk about things while we've got such a great audience with us today. One of the things that really needs the attention of the Georgia government is our DFAC system. We have over 10,000 kids who are our most vulnerable in our whole state. And I would have to say it is underfunded. I would like to prioritize where we can enhance the services we provide to the most vulnerable Georgians amongst us, those that are caught within the DFAC system. We need to look at ways to, as we see revenues increased, I'd love to see that be a priority from the governor's desk.
Thank you, sir. Response, Mrs. Bennett?
Anything for children, anything for our future, anything to support and grow our human capital. Ken and I have a soft place in our hearts for the Department of Family and Children Services. Ken is my husband. Our two daughters were adopted through that agency over 20 years ago. And unfortunately, with the austerity cuts that agency has faced, they have been unable to provide the same services that they did 20 years ago. The case managers are overburdened, they are underpaid, their professional development is lacking, and we need to support education, the Department of Family and Children Services, and DHR to benefit the most vulnerable and the least of us. They deserve our protection most of all.
Thank you, ma'am. We're going to move on to our next question. This is about transportation infrastructure. As everybody recalls, about 2 years ago, voters in Coweta County, throughout the counties that make up the Three Rivers Regional Development Area and Commission, roundly rejected the Regional 1-cent Transportation Special Local Option Sales Tax, the T-SPLOST, as did most regions across Georgia. The T-SPLOST was offered as a way to fund shortfalls in state transportation dollars. There have been continued conversations for some time now at the state level about a new approach to funding roads and infrastructure. What solutions do you favor on this? And we turn to Mrs. Bennett first.
The port is expanding, and we're very, very excited about that. It's something to celebrate. It's going to be great for the state of Georgia. By 2020, that expansion will be finished. Without a viable option, we are going to be facing double, even triple the amount of traffic on our current highways. We've all been stuck in the traffic, coming to and from Atlanta, heading out to LaGrange, going down to Macon, heading to the north side. And can you imagine that traffic doubled and tripled? Our community spoke loudly about T-SPLOST. Our community was threatened by the fact that they did not have enough local input. And the voters spoke loudly. But we have got to take a look at other options. The export-import highway, which was funded and planned for, was not approved by the Governor's Development Council.
Thank you, ma'am. Senator Crane.
Transportation is, is going to be very critical to the future of Georgia. With all the economic growth coming our way and with the expansion of the port, How are we going to move all this product and people around Georgia? We know our systems are clogged. I look at how we use our bonding parameters right now. We've invested heavily over time in education, but the neat thing about what we do with bonding projects, they're long-lasting projects. So when we build a new veterinary school, we build a new bioengineering school, those buildings last for 30 or 40 years. Roads are long-term viable projects. I'd like to see us reprioritize some of our $850 million a year in bonding capacity that we put out new every year toward transportation projects. I also want to make sure that the folks that travel on our roads pay for our roads. Everybody going to Florida, well, maybe not everybody, but 90% of them, they come through Georgia. And we like them when they stop in Coweta County and have some lunch or dinner. But they need to be paying their share for some of the finest road systems in the country.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Bennett, do you have a rebuttal?
I think that we need to capitalize on P3. We need to capitalize on the existing efforts of public and private partnerships to take care of some of our deepest issues, especially those involving transportation. The blatant act of ignoring the Tiger grant that was available for, and the plans for, and the funding for the export-import highway points to a very strong defect in the current state leadership. We need to take advantage of the professionals and the information and the public and private partnerships that we already have in place and that we have plans to support. Our state legislature and our leadership in Atlanta needs to support P3.
Thank you, ma'am. Response, Senator Crane.
When those federal dollars come down in our transportation projects, you just doubled or tripled the length of time that transportation project is going to take. The Savannah project has been 20 years in the making, give or take. We could have done it as a state in a fraction of that time. We don't need to always ask federal permission to do the things that's best for Georgians. I'm tired of being told by Washington how we, Georgians, should live our lives. We need to stand up and do for ourselves, and I see we're heading in the right direction with that.
Right. We'll move on to our next question. This is from the audience. What is your opinion of the recent Senate Bill 98, which prohibits abortion coverage in the state health plan? Ms. Crane, Senator Crane, you first.
Well, that's a softball question. The bulk of the language in that bill was authored by me and in my office. I don't think taxpayers should pay for abortions. And I just think that's a very simple thing. And so in the 2 years we've had it intact, the taxpayers have not spent somewhere between $600,000 and $1 million on abortions that would have otherwise been funded by taxpayers. For the last 40 years we've been funding these abortions and not knowing it. I think taxpayers needed to know that they were paying for these things, and most Georgians I know value life above all things, all life. And I'm very proud to be a part of that. It is a signature accomplishment that was not easy to do, but we got it done.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Bennett?
Aborting an unwanted pregnancy is a terrible and emotional decision that is made, but it should be made between a woman and her doctor and her God. What bothered me most about this Senate bill and the rhetoric that surrounded it was the denial of the right of privacy. I believe the phrase was a presumed but imaginary right of privacy that each woman has. And while the Senate bill was overwhelmingly approved by the supermajority of the state legislature, its rhetoric did tremendous damage in equal rights for women.
Thank you, ma'am. Rebuttal, Senator Crane?
Well, that wonderful right of privacy that we all enjoy at some level, to some degree, ends when it takes a human life.
Response, Ms. Bennett?
None.
Very well. We're going to move on to a series of questions about education. You've both already brought this up tonight a couple of times. We're going to start, I believe, with Mrs. Bennett with our first question. And it's a general one to start with. What approach would you like to see the state take with K through 12 education at this point in Georgia? What is your opinion on how we best empower local communities while ensuring our students remain globally competitive? Ms. Bennett, if you could start.
It is my profession I spend 8, 10, 12 hours a day, 14 hours a day with public education. I have heard some say that they do not support Common Core. I work with Common Core every day. As a matter of fact, when Common Core was introduced to Georgia, it really changed very little. The purpose of the Common Core was to enhance the writing and reading abilities of our students, to introduce more technical reading and writing skills, and prepare our students to be career ready and prepared for college. All we really did was make a very few adjustments and put a CC in front of GPS. What was Georgia Performance Standards became the Common Core. These standards changed very little, and our local school board and our local teachers were able to make adjustments to the Common Core standards that were set in place to meet the needs of our community and our state.
Thank you, ma'am. Senator Crane, to you.
I think Ms. Bennett was accurate when she said, that we had very good cohesion, very good correlation between the Georgia Performance Standards and the Common Core. So my question to you is, why sign up for the Common Core? There was no public input, zero, not some, not a little, not a lot, zero public input. A very small handful of people years ago decided that was the direction we're going to take Georgia. And I appreciate the hard work that our teachers do, but they're trying to navigate a minefield right now. They don't know what the tests are going to look like. Our students don't know what the tests are going to look like or how the questions are going to be answered. This is a waste of taxpayer money in Georgia to adopt the Common Core. We were on the right path in Georgia. Our test scores here in the county reflect it. They're on the upward trend, and this may be a hiccup in the road, and it's going to cost taxpayers a lot of money to do it.
Thank you. I will allow, and partially because we had wanted to ask about Common Core, you've both brought it up, would allow up to a 1-minute rebuttal, starting with Ms. Bennett.
The small handful of people that made the decisions about Common Core were 7 Republican governors. The state of Georgia did make a decision to adopt it when they accepted the federal funding race to the top. Teachers are not struggling with it. We are working very strongly with it. We are working on professional development. We're using it to set the standards for our students so that they can compete around the state, around the region, around the nation, and on a global stage. The Common Core was not rammed down our throat. It didn't change much about what we do in the state of Georgia. Giving students standards and giving teachers standards is a good thing.
Thank you, ma'am. Response, Senator Crane.
By our own admission, we already had good standards in Georgia. We were working in the right direction, and I think we have cost ourselves a lot of money to try to adapt to this new set of standards.
Right.
May I speak to that money?
Would you object to that, Senator Crane?
Fine.
Please do, and
Senator
we'll allow
Crane
30
is correct.
seconds.
We had a wonderful testing system in place. It was called the end-of-course tests. It had been in place for approximately 9 years. We were collecting data. We were able to get testing data and able to adjust our curriculum. We were able to adjust our differentiation based on test scores that we were receiving from the end-of-course test. And if you want to talk about wasted tax dollars, let's talk about the $175 million that was spent in June, given to McGraw-Hill in order to rewrite the end-of-course tests and call them the end-of-course assessments. That is a waste of tax dollars. We had a great system in place that was meeting and being adjusted to meet Common Core standards and requirements.
Response, Senator Crane.
I think it's a valid point. Why did we go down that road? So,
Thank you very much. We're going to move on to a couple of other educational questions. Senator Crane, I'll go with you first. We have a couple of these that we could add to it. This one, I apologize. Here we are. Not all high schools students desire or perhaps are on the trajectory to go to college. How can schools better prepare students with for jobs with skills that pay well? how can we educate all of our students to become a part of that 21st century economy? Senator Crane.
I think we're kind of sitting in the poster child of how to give young people the opportunity to do. Look what's going on back here and behind the cameras. These are young people. These are our students that are running a TV production. I got to run a table saw and shop. You know, this is much better. This is impressive. What we do here at CEC is a model for the entire country. People come here to see what we're doing. And I think Coweta's got it right. We're very fortunate to have good leadership at a lot of levels. And I think our education system here reflects that.
Very good. Mrs. Bennett.
I agree with the Senator wholeheartedly. We are standing in the crown jewel of technical education. Certainly the CEC has been ahead of making the adjustments necessary to keep up with the times. What we need to do in education is to capitalize on the information that is available to us and continue to fund and fully fund programs like this. CCRPI, College and Career Readiness Program and Planning, is in place. It is wholly embraced by teachers. We have got programs that are going to make Georgia successful. What we do not need to happen is for revenue to be reduced, for funding to disappear, or to be hijacked for other unnecessary programs.
Thank you very much. Rebuttal, Mr. Senator Crane?
I think the governor's priorities are very clear, that he, and I agree with him on this, focuses on this career path for young people to help them get an idea how they're going to best serve their community and live out their dreams.
Very good. Response, Mrs. Bennett.
I agree.
Very well. Our next question, also on the theme of education, goes to Ms. Bennett first, I believe. Currently, the State Board of Education is appointed by the governor. There has been legislation introduced to make the Board of Education elected by the people, I think in congressional district. Do you support an elected State Board of Education, Mrs. Bennett?
That is going to take a great deal of examination. My first and initial reaction would be, I always love the democratic process when people vote for those who represent them, but the only way that we would get rid of the political influence that I believe is driving this, if it's an appointed board, then certainly there are political influences, and the only way to protect ourselves from that is if it were non-partisan elections to the State Board of Education. Because certainly education should be not a political football and should be decided in a bipartisan and nonpartisan manner.
Thank you, ma'am. Senator Crane.
I think the citizens should always select their representatives. That's just, right. And I think at that level, you don't want to, that's a very important role in the state. Very, very big shoes to fill. And I think the people would do well in selecting the people to represent them at that level.
Rebuttal, Ms. Bennett? All right. We'll move on to our last education question. It's been submitted to us. In a sense, this is asking about Georgia's direction with charter schools. And it asks, do traditional public and public charter schools offer equal opportunities for all students? Does charter school funding hurt public schools? That's a question that we'll go to Senator Crane first.
Well, to make sure everybody understands, charter schools are public schools. They're just organized differently than your local school system is. So they're not like they're something other than public schools. Do they hurt funding? I don't think they do. We are funding students. We're not funding systems, my friends. If we're just funding a system, it's going to just gobble up all the dollars. We need to give our parents and our students the broadest choice of educational opportunities, whether it be like CEC or whether it be vouchers or charter systems. That, I ask you as parents, wouldn't you want to be able to choose where your children go to school? Or do you want that to be decided for you by your zip code?
Thank you, sir. Mrs. Bennett.
We're standing in a charter school. The CEC is a charter school. My issue with charter schools versus public schools, the traditional public school, is the level of accountability. I think it is wholly unfair and uneven when charter schools are not held to the same accountability requirements that the traditional public school is, that they are allowed to refuse to allow their test scores to be made public, that they do not have to respond to requests for their students' participation in and performance on the same standardized tests that those who attend traditional schools. My other issue with charter schools is with transportation. So many times students are enrolled in a charter school. It is incumbent upon the parents to participate during the workday and to provide transportation for their own children. If we're going to have a viable charter school program, then we need to provide the same opportunities to all of the students for accountability and support.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. Rebuttal, Senator Crane? All righty. Thank you very much. You've been very patient as we've moved through some very hefty topics and have had a great debate. We only have a couple of questions left before we get to our closing statements. These are going to be on health care and just your ideas of what we could bring to the table on health care in tonight's forum. I believe we start with Ms. Bennett on this question. Health care spending makes up a significant portion of our state's budget. Medicaid and Peach Care account, I think, to approximately 12% of the budget. What, in your opinion, is the state of our health care obligations here in Georgia? And we'll start with you, Mrs. Bennett.
The bottom line of that question is, do I support Medicaid expansion? And I do. I do. Too many Georgians do not have appropriate health care available for them. The rest of us are carrying that burden with higher health care expenses that we are paying for. The elder adults, the smallest children, the young, hard-working poor that work full-time do not have appropriate health care coverage. Every April 15th, because I wait to the last minute, I pay my federal income tax. And I do not understand why we can sit aside and allow those tax dollars to go to other states to help their citizens and abandon our own.
Thank you, ma'am. Senator Crane.
Well, to the point, excuse me. Hopefully I can get this out. I'm running out of voice now. Froggy impersonation is going very well. I do not support Medicaid expansion. And the reason is this: Medicaid is broken. The CBO says it, the Medicaid actuaries say it, everybody says the system is broken. And why would we want to expand a broken system? They promised that they're going to pay for the whole thing for 3 years, or 90% of it for 3 years. But why is it that we're, as a state, with all the rest of our Medicaid dollars, they're only paying 60-some%? I can promise you in the very, very, very near future, the federal government would only pay a much smaller fraction of what they're promising to pay now. There is a way to fix and meet the needs of those who need quality health care, but we cannot do it under the thumbs of the federal government. We need a full waiver from the federal Medicaid requirements, and we need to be able to do what's best for Georgians. There are solutions, but not under their thumb.
Thank you, sir. Rebuttal, Mrs. Bennett.
The Georgia needs of medically fragile children is becoming more critical. Medically fragile children. These are children with cerebral palsy, muscular dystrophy, spina bifida, genetic disorders, and traumatic injury. Children. The gap between what is deemed medically necessary for these children and what is actually covered by their private insurance and or Medicaid is widening daily. Georgia's fragile kids. I do not condone turning away our own money and allowing our hospitals to close and our citizens to be denied proper and timely health care because we're bothered that it's federal dollars. It was mine to begin with, and I want it back.
Thank you, ma'am. Rebuttal, Senator Crane.
Well, the money they're talking about is not any of ours. It's our grandkids. They are borrowing for our future, for our current convenience, and that is not a way to run a government.
Thank you both very much. We have one other healthcare question, submitted question. It kind of gives a bit of an opportunity to maybe perhaps expand on your thoughts in a little bit different direction. The question is that only a couple of generations ago, many families had more extended families, stay-at-home mothers who could care for elderly parents. Today, so many people work into their 70s. They cannot be available to care for elderly parents to the extent that they sometimes need it. Nursing homes can be expensive. Some families have a hard time affording them. As state senator or representative, how would you address this problem? And I believe we are starting with Senator Crane.
Okay. This past session, we separated out the Department of Aging. Forgive me, folks. I'm sorry you have to listen to this from my tone of voice. But we separated out the Department of Aging Services because we recognize what is coming to Georgia and to the entire country as a whole, because our birth rates are dropping, and so what our society looks like age-wise is changing very, very dramatically and actually very quickly. And so Georgia is prioritizing that by separating out that department so we can specifically address the needs of our aging population, and I think we're headed in the right direction with that. We have got to allow people to plan for their future. If we take it from them now, how can they invest it for the future?
Thank you, sir. Mrs. Bennett.
Georgia is the 9th fastest growing state in aging population. Not only are we aging, but a number of citizens are choosing to move to Georgia to be nearer their younger family members. The Department of Human Services funding has remained flat since 2004. This is something that is near and dear to my heart. My sister and I share the care of our aging, infirm, elderly mother. Additionally, I volunteer and sit on the board for the Meals on Wheels of Coweta. I know that food insecurity and housing insecurity is real in the state of Georgia. And I'm not talking about the future elderly. I am talking about those people now that do not have the funds to feed themselves. These are people who were viable citizens, who contributed to our state, who worked, who paid their taxes, and we need to follow the advice and the programs and planning of the Council on Aging and fund their programs.
Thank you, ma'am. Rebuttal, Senator Crane.
No rebuttal.
Very well. In that case, we will move on to our closing statements in just a moment. I believe as a result of our order, we're going to go with Ms. Bennett first, Senator Crane second here in our closing statements. Thank you very much for your great answers tonight and this engaging conversation we've had here. Up to 3 minutes if you'd like, and we'll start with you, Mrs. Bennett, for your closing statement.
Good, thank you. I would like to thank everyone for their attention and their caring. You are the future of Georgia, and I thank you for being here. I ran for this office 3 years ago. At that time, I worked very hard to research and prepare myself and be familiar with the issues important to the people of District 28. And since that time, I have continued my attention on those issues important to our district. 3 years later, except for one, we are talking about the same issues. In 3 years, the problems remain the same. But more importantly, they have intensified. Georgia is being left behind. But we can have a Georgia that's moving forward. We can come together as a state. We can solve our problems. I share your dreams. I believe that government works. I believe that politics is the art of negotiation, not a strategy of obstacles. With unity of purpose and the decency and strength and the wisdom of our citizens, Georgia can move forward. I want honest, workable solutions, not easy answers. You deserve clear leadership, not false claims. The questions asked here this evening were great. The answers will be found by leaders who are forward-thinking and proactive. Leaders who do not simply react. Leaders who do think about the secondary effects and the hidden costs of the decisions that they make. Leaders who will ask, what will this look like in 3 years? How do we move Georgia forward? You will do that. Elect leadership that is focused on our region and working for our future. Elect leadership committed to an agenda that will move District 28 forward, not distracted by an agenda intended to disrupt and divide. I'm working for our future. I am focused on our region. I am the right person for the job. I am asking for your vote, starting with early voting on October 13th. Cynthia Bennett, candidate for Georgia Senate, District 28.
Thank you, ma'am. And your closing statements, Senator Crane.
I will try it. Excuse me. It's about gone. So, we talked about a lot of problems tonight, and government is not the answer, my friends. Government never was the answer. The answer to all our problems are reflected in many of the comments you heard tonight. The answer to our problems as a county, as our local cities, as a state, and as a nation, and honestly for the world, we have to have a bigger perspective, folks. We have to. But the answer to that is in the strengths of our family. We have got to build on our strengths as families and not continue to weaken those things that are foundational to our state and our nation. I deeply believe that this is crucial to where we go. We can put in any program, we can put in any ideas you want, but if we undermine the strength of our homes, the things that have strong biblical foundations, if we undermine those because we don't want to offend somebody, we are doing ourselves a great disservice. And we're doing our children and grandchildren harm. I am one of the most conservative representatives as senator of Georgians in the entire state. My voting record reflects it. The Chamber of Commerce doesn't like me. The leadership that pushes some of their ideas that are bad for Georgians don't like my voting record. But I vote based on principle. I'm not trying to put roadblocks out there. I'm not trying to make things difficult. I'm trying to do what's right for future Georgians. And I guarantee if it's right for future Georgians, it's right for us today. We cannot take a handout today and charge it to our kids' future bank accounts. We have got to do what Georgia has done for the last 4 years. Tighten its belts, run fiscally conservative government, and come out charging like we have. And we're attracting business and people from all over the country. They come here because Georgia is a great place to live. You reelect me, and I'll make sure we continue to be the best place in the country to work, live, and do business. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to take just a moment before we close out to thank several people. Thank you again to the Central Educational Center and Mike Britt and his team members who have put on this set for us in this forum tonight. We greatly appreciate it. Thank you to the Democratic Party of Coweta County, Chairman Dennis Thompson, and all that he has done. The Coweta County Republican Party, Chairman Brant Frost, again, who's also been up here with us, and all that they have done in the Newnan-Coweta Chamber of Commerce, everything that everyone's done in coming together and putting this forum on tonight. Thank you to our audience, and again, most of all, thank you to our candidates. I think you have borne up very well under hot lights and with hoarse throats, and you've come here and had a wonderful and vigorous debate. We thank you for doing that. Most of all, we thank you for running for public office. I'd like everybody to congratulate you for that. Thank you.